Focus on yourself and watch what changes. Carl Jung. There comes a moment in life when you realize you have been everywhere for everyone except fully present for yourself. You carried emotions that were never yours to resolve. You adjusted your voice so others would feel comfortable. You stayed longer than your soul could sustain. And still, something inside you feels tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep can fix, but the kind that comes from living too far away from your own center. This moment is not weakness, it is awareness. And if you listen carefully, it is the beginning of a profound internal shift. Western culture teaches independence, strength, productivity, but it rarely teaches inner alignment. Many people grow up learning how to function, how to succeed, how to be emotionally competent for others, yet never learn how to sit quietly with themselves without tension. Carl Jung warned that when the inner world is neglected, life becomes reactive instead of conscious. You move, decide, love, and sacrifice, but from patterns you never chose. Focusing on yourself has been misunderstood for a long time. It is often confused with selfishness, withdrawal, or emotional distance. But in psychological terms, it is something entirely different. It is the return of psychic energy to its rightful place. When your attention is constantly directed outward, toward approval, expectations, relationships, responsibilities, your inner life becomes fragmented. You may appear stable on the outside, yet feel strangely disconnected on the inside. This disconnection is subtle. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It shows up as chronic emotional fatigue, as difficulty feeling joy without guilt, as overthinking small interactions, as staying in situations that quietly drain you. Jung described this state as living outside the process of individuation, the natural psychological movement toward becoming a whole person. And wholeness does not come from doing more. It comes from recentering. This video is not an invitation to abandon relationships or responsibilities. It is an invitation to stop abandoning yourself inside them. If something in these words resonates with you, it means your inner life is asking for attention. Not drama, not urgency, but clarity. And if you choose to stay here, to explore this space of reflection and psychological depth, I invite you to subscribe, because this is where we slow down, think deeply, and rebuild inner stability from the inside out. The central concept: returning to your inner center. There is a fundamental difference between being connected to others and being absorbed by them. When you are absorbed by others, your emotional state becomes dependent. Your decisions shift according to external reactions. Your sense of self slowly erodes. But when you are centered, connection becomes choice, not obligation. Jung believed that every person needs an internal axis, a psychological center that remains stable regardless of circumstances. Without this center, the personality becomes porous. You begin to internalize emotions that are not yours. You feel responsible for tensions you did not create. You carry invisible burdens simply because you are capable of carrying them. And capability, when unexamined, often becomes self-neglect. Focusing on yourself does not mean ignoring others. It means stopping the constant outward leakage of attention. Think of attention as energy. When it is scattered, it weakens you. When it is gathered, it stabilizes you. The moment you stop chasing validation, something quiet settles inside. The moment you stop trying to be understood by everyone, you begin to understand yourself. This shift changes how life responds to you. You speak with less urgency. You explain less. You tolerate less confusion. Not because you are colder, but because you are clearer. Jung emphasized that psychological maturity begins when a person stops living from borrowed values and starts living from inner truth. This truth is not loud, it doesn't demand attention, it simply exists. And when you live from that place, relationships reorganize themselves naturally. Some drift away, others deepen. Not because you forced change, but because your inner posture changed. Returning to yourself is not a retreat from life. It is a return to authorship. You stop reacting, you start choosing, and that choice, quiet, internal, invisible, is where real transformation begins. Deep psychological analysis: the shadow, projection, and emotional exhaustion. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that modern psychology struggles to name clearly. It is not burnout from work. It is not depression in the clinical sense. It is inner depletion. You are functioning, you are responsible, you are emotionally available, and yet something inside you feels strangely empty, as if your life is being lived slightly off-center. Carl Jung understood this exhaustion long before it became common language. He recognized that when people live primarily through adaptation, adapting to expectations, roles, emotional climates, they slowly disconnect from their inner core. This disconnection does not happen dramatically. It happens quietly. You start prioritizing harmony over truth, stability over authenticity, being reasonable over being real, and slowly, the psyche compensates. Jung called one of these compensations the shadow. The shadow is not simply negativity or destructive impulses. It is everything in you that has been disowned in order to belong, to be accepted, or to survive emotionally. Your unexpressed anger, your need for rest, your desire to say no, your wish to be seen without performing. None of this disappears, it relocates, and what relocates into the shadow does not remain passive. One of the most common ways the shadow expresses itself is through projection. You begin to experience externally what you have not integrated internally. You feel irritated by people who take too much, while never noticing how often you overgive. You feel disappointed by others' emotional absence, while ignoring how emotionally absent you are toward yourself. You feel invisible, while having made yourself invisible long ago. In English-speaking culture, projection often disguises itself as relationship issues or communication problems. But at its root, it is frequently an inner imbalance. Jung observed that we do not relate to people as they are. We relate to them as carriers of unconscious content. This is why certain dynamics repeat even when partners, jobs, or environments change. The psyche is not trying to punish you. It is trying to resolve unfinished internal work. This is where repetition patterns emerge. You may notice that you consistently end up in situations where you are the emotionally mature one. You are the stabilizer. You are the one who understands, waits, adapts. At first, this feels like strength. Over time, it feels like depletion. The unconscious repeats what has not been understood, not because it enjoys suffering, but because it seeks integration. Modern culture often encourages moving on quickly. Let it go. Be positive. Don't overthink. But Jung warned that what is prematurely bypassed psychologically does not heal. It returns in another form, and often it returns as chronic emotional fatigue. You feel tired without knowing why. You feel overstimulated by small things. You feel distant from joy even when life looks stable. This is not because something is wrong with you. It is because too much of your psychic energy is invested outside your inner center. In Jungian terms, your libido, your life energy, is outwardly overcommitted. Focusing on yourself is not narcissism, it is energy retrieval. It is the act of reclaiming attention that has been unconsciously leaking into expectations, responsibilities, and emotional labor that is not reciprocated. When you begin to turn inward, not obsessively but consciously, something important happens. You start recognizing patterns instead of personalizing pain. You stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" and begin asking, "What is this pattern trying to teach me?" This shift alone changes your relationship with suffering. You no longer see discomfort as failure. You see it as information. The shadow loses its power when it is made conscious. When you acknowledge your anger, it stops controlling your boundaries indirectly. When you acknowledge your need for rest, your body stops forcing exhaustion. When you acknowledge your desire for depth, superficial connections lose their grip. This is psychological maturity, not emotional coldness, not detachment, but integration. A person who integrates their shadow does not become harsh. They become grounded. They stop living on emotional autopilot. They stop repeating the same dynamics with different faces. They stop leaking energy into situations that cannot return it. And most importantly, they stop abandoning themselves in order to be loved. This is where real change begins, not through external restructuring, but through inner reorientation. Transformation and inner stability, reclaiming your center without hardening. Real transformation does not begin with changing circumstances. It begins with changing where you are standing internally. Many people believe that growth means becoming stronger, tougher, less affected. But psychological maturity, especially in Jungian terms, works differently. It does not reduce sensitivity, it organizes it. When you begin to focus on yourself in a conscious way, The first thing that changes is not your life. It is your relationship with your inner experience. You stop immediately reacting to everything you feel. You stop interpreting every emotion as a problem that needs fixing. You begin to observe. This observation is not passive, it is stabilizing. Jung believed that the psyche heals through conscious relationship, not suppression. What you relate to consciously no longer needs to control you unconsciously. This is where inner stability begins. You start by noticing how often you override your own signals. The moment you feel tired, you push forward. The moment something feels wrong, you rationalize it away. The moment you feel distance, you explain it instead of respecting it. These habits were not mistakes, they were adaptations. But adaptations that once helped you survive can later prevent you from becoming whole. Transformation begins when you stop treating discomfort as an enemy and start treating it as guidance. Instead of asking, "How do I get rid of this feeling?" you begin to ask, "What is this feeling asking me to understand?" This shift changes your entire inner posture. You stop forcing clarity, you allow it to emerge. Inner stability is built when you learn to pause between stimulus and response. Not react immediately, not explain immediately, not fix immediately. Pause. In that pause, something powerful happens. You regain choice. Modern life conditions people to live in constant response mode. Messages, expectations, emotional cues, everything demands instant engagement. But Jung emphasized that a person without inner pause is not free. They are driven. Freedom begins where awareness interrupts compulsion. As you begin to center yourself, you notice subtle but important changes. You speak less impulsively. You commit more selectively. You withdraw earlier from situations that drain you, not dramatically, not defensively, but quietly. This quietness is often misunderstood. Others may perceive it as distance. In reality, it is self-regulation. You are no longer flooding situations with excess emotional energy. You are no longer compensating for imbalance with over-functioning. You are allowing relationships, work, and environments to meet you where you actually are. This is a critical point. When you stop overgiving, you stop attracting dynamics that require overgiving. When you stop explaining yourself excessively, you stop engaging with people who need justification to respect you. When you stop abandoning your inner rhythm, your nervous system begins to settle. Inner stability is not emotional numbness. It is emotional containment. You still feel deeply, but your feelings no longer spill everywhere. They have a place, a boundary, a rhythm. Jung described individuation as the process of becoming a unified self rather than a collection of reactions. This unity does not make you rigid, it makes you coherent. Your values align with your actions. Your intuition aligns with your decisions. Your emotions align with your limits. And because of this alignment, you experience less internal conflict. You are no longer constantly negotiating with yourself. Should I stay or leave? Should I speak or stay quiet? Should I adapt or resist? These questions lose urgency because your inner compass becomes clearer. You trust yourself more. This trust is not blind confidence, it is familiarity. You have listened to yourself enough to know when something feels wrong and when it feels right. This familiarity changes how you move through the world. You stop chasing reassurance. You stop scanning for approval. You stop living slightly ahead of yourself. You arrive. And when you arrive internally, the external world reorganizes, not because you demand it, but because you no longer participate in what depletes you. Some connections fade, others deepen. Some situations resolve without confrontation simply because you are no longer feeding them. Inner stability creates natural boundaries. You don't need to announce them. They are felt. People sense when access to you is no longer unlimited. And this is not a loss. It is refinement. You become more present in fewer places instead of absent everywhere. Jung believed that a person who has found their inner center does not need to dominate or submit. They relate. They are not controlled by fear of abandonment or fear of conflict. They are guided by inner alignment. This is the essence of transformation. Not becoming someone else, but becoming undivided. You stop splitting yourself between who you are and who you think you should be. And from that place, life becomes less exhausting. Not because it is easier, but because you are no longer fighting yourself inside it. When you understand your mind, your life reorganizes itself. There is a moment in inner development when you realize that clarity is more powerful than change. Not change driven by impulse, not change driven by escape, but change driven by understanding. Many people spend years trying to improve their lives without ever understanding their inner structure. They adjust the surface, habits, routines, relationships, while the same emotional patterns quietly repeat underneath. Carl Jung dedicated his life to a truth that remains uncomfortable yet liberating. Life does not change sustainably until the psyche becomes conscious of itself. You can move forward externally and still remain psychologically stuck. You can appear successful and still feel internally misaligned. You can be surrounded by people and still feel profoundly alone. Because what shapes your experience of life is not events themselves, but the inner position from which you meet them. When you understand your mind, you stop interpreting everything as personal failure. You stop seeing emotions as obstacles. You stop fighting parts of yourself that were never the problem. You begin to see patterns. You see why certain relationships drained you, why certain dynamics repeated, why you stayed longer than you should have, why you doubted yourself even when nothing was wrong. And this understanding brings something rare in modern life: inner relief. Not relief because everything is fixed, but relief because nothing is mysterious anymore. Psychological maturity does not remove pain. It removes confusion. And confusion is what exhausts the soul. When you understand how projection works, you stop chasing validation in the wrong places. When you understand the shadow, you stop being afraid of your own intensity. When you understand repetition, you stop mistaking familiarity for destiny. This is not abstract philosophy. It is practical inner orientation. Understanding your psyche changes how you choose. You choose with less urgency. You choose with more discernment. You choose without betraying your internal signals. And gradually, your life becomes quieter. Not empty, but coherent. You no longer feel pulled in 10 emotional directions. You no longer feel obligated to explain yourself endlessly. You no longer feel responsible for maintaining other people's inner balance. Because you have learned to maintain your own. One of the most important insights Jung offered is that maturity is not about becoming morally superior or emotionally detached. It is about becoming integrated. An integrated person does not live in extremes. They do not oscillate between overgiving and withdrawal. They do not alternate between control and collapse. They live from an inner axis. And this axis does not depend on praise, reassurance, or external certainty. It depends on understanding. This is why learning how the mind works is not an intellectual hobby. It is a form of self-respect. When you understand your inner mechanisms, you stop demanding from others what only self-awareness can provide. You stop expecting relationships to heal childhood wounds. You stop expecting work to give identity. You stop expecting love to replace self-knowledge. And paradoxically, when these expectations fall away, relationships become healthier. Work becomes more meaningful. Love becomes less anxious and more grounded. Because you are no longer asking life to compensate for unconscious gaps. You are meeting life as a conscious participant. This is why depth matters, not surface-level advice, not motivational noise, but structured psychological understanding. There are moments when short insights are not enough, when a person feels that what they are experiencing cannot be resolved with quick answers. Those moments signal readiness for depth. Depth is not about complexity, it is about precision. It is about learning to recognize your inner movements before they turn into decisions that cost you peace. It is about understanding the architecture of your emotional life so that you are no longer governed by it unconsciously. This is where certain works do not function as information, but as companionship. They walk with you through the parts of yourself you were never taught how to understand. They offer language for experiences you always felt, but could never fully articulate. They help you mature without hardening. That is the spirit behind Transformation with the Teachings of Carl Jung, mentioned in the comment. Not as a promise of quick change, but as a continuation for those who sense that understanding the human mind is not optional anymore. It is essential. Because when you understand how the psyche organizes itself, you stop living reactively. You stop repeating emotional cycles without knowing why. You stop making choices from unexamined fear. You stop carrying what does not belong to you. You begin to live deliberately, Not perfectly, but consciously. And consciousness changes everything. If you have stayed until this point, it means something inside you recognizes this process. It means you are no longer satisfied with surviving emotionally. You want to live with clarity. I invite you to stay in this space, to subscribe, and to write in the comments this simple but powerful sentence. I choose inner clarity. Because the moment you understand your mind, you stop being pushed by life and begin to walk through it with steadiness, awareness, and quiet strength.